then we're going to have you really dive into the elements of those stories in those small groups once again, and we'll dive into those definitions and what you're going to be looking for then. And then after those conversations have kind of taken their course, and midway through, we'll take a bio break, just so I recognize 3 hours is a long time to be sitting in front of a computer screen. So we've got 10 minutes for that. And then we're going to have you take the first pass. What do you think the why statement is for your church? Then we're going to talk about how you can take this back, replicate the experience, continue the conversation with your own congregations, and then we'll hopefully get you out of here at a reasonable hour, feeling excited instead of drained. So that's going to be my goal for the day. So let's first jump in and start talking a little bit about this concept of the golden circle. And so at a high level, this is usually referenced in a business context, but this model applies to everything. Whether you think about it as an individual, an organization, a business, a community, any of those kinds of things, all human behavior takes place at 3 levels: what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And in the context of today, and if you think about what we're looking at as far as the churches here, your what's you're already familiar with. These are the tangible things that you produce. So think about these as your church services, the Bible studies, the charities that you have, and so on. Those activities, those actions that you take that represent what you stand for and what you believe in the community. And so these are the very tangible, recognizable pieces, so we all recognize them very easily. Now, less organizations and less individuals know how they do what they do. And when I'm talking about that, I'm not talking about a process. Many of us could think about the process that we take to deliver on those what's, right? The steps that it takes to bring that church service to life on a Sunday morning, right? Or if you're running a youth group, the things that you do, how you fundraise, all those kinds of things, right? Well, we're not talking about that today. What we're talking about when we talk about how is the way you show up along the way. Right? These are the things that set you apart from other people who do about the same thing that you do. So you may have a set of common values as a church, but your congregation probably shows up differently for each other than the other congregations in this group today, right? You have different sets of values, different people and different dynamics, and that informs how you show up for each other. And maybe you have a different vibe and you'll gravitate towards one church community over another. Even if they are the same denomination, maybe you feel one resonates with you more than another, right? And this is generally because of how the people around us show up and how we approach creating those services. And so this is what we're talking about. And that's why less people and organizations really put a lot of time and effort into it, is because it just kind of happens, right? It's just how we show up inherently and instinctively. But when it comes to why, oftentimes we can take for granted the why when we think about it in the context of church, right? Purpose, cause, belief. That's how Simon, the guy who came up with the golden circle, kind of articulates it in his TED Talk and everything like that. And so when we think about it in that context, like I said, we think about it in our faith, right? Where we're going. But at a community level, as a person outside the church looking in, then it needs to be more focused, more applicable to me. And so when I think about the why of a church and what we're working towards today, is bringing that down to when you're living those things, living those values, contributing to that purpose, that cause, really representing your belief set. What does it look like? What's that thing that you do and the impact that it ultimately makes on people? And that's what we're going to be focusing towards today. As means of an example, I actually I recently did some work with a group who they own a chain of, well, not even a chain, they're kind of like an association of people who own theaters and do live theater. And I recently did a session with them, and I talked with them about how they I looked at their websites and how they communicated who they were. And they very much did it the exact same way most of us do. They started with the thing they're most familiar with, talked about their what's, moved towards their hows, how they were a little bit different. And generally, none of them actually got to why it mattered, why they do what they do. So I'll give you an example of how it kind of sounded. In general, they would say something like, we're a world-class live entertainment provider. How do we do that? Well, we take an unconventional perspective, we call it like we see it, and we're committed to making long-term progress. Cool. But it didn't really tell me why I should come see a show at their specific theater, right? Didn't really tell me what they stand for, just maybe that their approach is a little bit different. And what I encourage them to do is to dive into, when we're at our best, what do we actually do? So they went through, shared some stories like you're going to share today. When were you most proud to be a part of this organization? And through those stories, what they came to realize is that the effect they had on their communities was wildly different than their what. And so when we had that conversation, they got really clear on why they did what they did, and had them start that way instead and reverse the order. And it came out like this. And by the way, can you hear me? I know, Jolene, you're having issues. Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, cool. So after re-examining, what they had was, they said, well, we give people the confidence to live their lives as authentically and fully as possible. The shows that they put on helped the community see themselves up on stage in an actor that was overcoming challenges. And then they were able to be more confident, take those risks, things like that. And so that's why they do what they do. How do they do that? Well, they take an unconventional perspective, call it like they see it, and they're committed to making long-term progress. They just happen to be a world-class live entertainment provider. And if you think about, like, that feels different, even just delivering the information that way. And if you think about it, even just at an operational level, if you look at their why versus their what, the way you would approach running an organization like that is going to be wildly different. If my goal is to give people confidence to live their lives authentically and fully, versus if I see myself just as a live entertainment provider. I'm going to make different decisions. I'm going to market differently. I'm going to have different setups and ways I approach these things. And so this is what we're working towards, giving you that context, that message of what are we at our core, what do we stand for? And so I also mentioned that it feels a little bit different. And what I mean by that is, biologically, we're actually kind of wired to respond to this type of communication. And so this is why it's so important, as Lorenzo mentioned, of getting, if we're going to do anything as far as fundraising and things like that, the way we connect with people is through communicating like this, because of how our brains are wired. And so if you look at there's a couple of sections of the brain that correlate really nicely with regard to function of the golden circle. So you've got your neocortex, which relates really nicely to the what level of the golden circle, and your limbic brain, which correlates nicely to the why and how levels of the golden circle. So I'll walk you through those, as I know I am not a neuroscientist, and I'm guessing probably not a ton of those on the call today either. So we're going to keep this high level and simple. But with your neocortex, people think about that as your modern human brain. This is the part of the brain that allows you to do rational and analytical thought. It's also where language lives. This is where all of our words live. So this is why this correlates to the what level of the golden circle, is because it is fluent in that language because, one, the words live there, but two, analysis and rational thought all are parts of putting those things together and putting it out into the world. And then you've got the limbic part of your brain. And the limbic part of your brain is largely responsible for your feelings, your emotions, like trust, loyalty, things like that. However, while it's the biggest influence when it comes to human behavior and decision-making, has no capacity for written or spoken language. It communicates, but with things like goosebumps or getting a lump in your throat, crying, those kinds of things, those emotional responses is the limbic system communicating with you. And so when you look at that, then it's not a surprise to see that. I mean, I think most of us can recognize, as human beings, we are not always the most rational beings out there. I don't know about you. I'd like to think I am, but then I look at my purchasing histories and I go, wow, you are definitely not a rational person, right? I think we've all had that experience in some form or fashion in our lives, where all of the data pointed one direction, but we still, our gut told us to go the other direction, right? And that's the limbic part of your brain saying this, it doesn't feel right. And that's ultimately what drives most of our behavior. And so that's why Simon has this phrase, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Very similar, right? Great on a bumper sticker, but at the same time, biologically accurate. When you're able to convey your why, it connects with people on an emotional level. It can compel them to feel a certain way. And if they align with you, they are more likely to take action. If they see that vision of the future that you are sharing with them, they are more likely to contribute towards it and support you in that vision. versus if you just start with your what's. Now, when it comes to the golden circle and behavior, there's 3 levels at which you get balance across the golden circle. And that's really where authenticity comes from. And what we want to do is get the ball rolling towards that today. So the first thing is what we're working on right now, which is creating clarity of why you do what you do. So articulating that cause, that belief, that version of you at your best as an organization, as a community, and making sure it's rooted in reality. It's not who we wish we were. It's not who we want to be someday. It's recognizing who we've been at our best over the years and putting words to that so that we know it's authentic. You already know how to do it. You just got to be more intentional about it. And once you have that, then you need to be disciplined in how you show up along the way. Meaning you have those values that represent who you are at your core. Some of those are going to be built in. But those other ones that I mentioned of how your congregation shows up for each other, those are ones that are unique to that group of people within the 4 walls that you're in worshiping. And so thinking about those things, what are the values of us when we're at our best, and sticking to them, even when it's inconvenient. And when you do that, what you hopefully start to create, but you still need to be mindful about doing, is creating some consistency of what you do. And so that's ensuring that these tangible outputs that you create, the partnerships that you keep, the causes that you support, the things that you say, all are in alignment with who you say you are and what you say you believe. And that's what balance across the golden circle looks like. And by the way, I see a lot of note-taking, which is great. Also, this is going to be available for you. Lorenzo, did we already share this with them? Cool. So you have a PDF of this entire slide deck.
They will have it at the end of the session. I will send it all to them. But yes.
Perfect. Yes, I asked Lorenzo. I was like, "Hold off! I want some mystery ahead of this." So that's on me. But yeah, you will have the full slide deck to take home as well. So no worries on that. So that's what we're working towards: is creating the sense of authenticity, laying the foundation for that to move forward. Before we get into the meat of the day, are there any questions? Ooh, good first question, which is, are we recording? We were not for that first. Oh yeah, we were. We did. We have been recording. Great. What other questions might we have? I'm going to take this question slide off the screen and look at your beautiful faces right here. What questions come to mind? Anything? Pop it into the chat. If you have a question, would love to answer any of these that are coming in. Or if someone wants to come off mute. Also
sorry, that question was from me, actually, Matt. Could you make me the host while this is happening? Thanks, buddy.
Boom.
Perfect.
You are the host. Beautiful. How can we make emotions from words? So great question. When it comes to your why, what I find is the most compelling thing you can do is paint a picture of the world that you want to see and want to live in. That to me is where the emotional connection comes from. Is if you can say, when we're at our best, here's the thing that we give to people and the difference we hope that it makes, the world that we're hoping to build. If other people have that same need or desire, they want to see that same world, that's where the emotional connection comes in. Same thing with if you've ever had a strong relationship with somebody, just because of the way they made you feel, right? The values that they had, the code of conduct that they had that made you feel that sense of trust. That's another great way. And so when you articulate these things, if someone recognizes and sees themselves in you through your why or hows, that's where the emotion typically comes in. Oh yeah, see, now we're going. I love it. Okay, we've got so many chats. So should the why be our mission statement? How you use this, totally up to you. I will leave that to the conversations that you have moving forward. I just like the reason we say the word why is because people have different meanings for vision, mission, purpose, all that stuff. So we just say why, because to us, it kind of captures the essence behind each of those. So how you just decide to use it moving forward, totally up to you. I'll do a couple more of these, and then I would love to get us into our first exercise of the day.
There's a good one here that says, who determines the why?
Yeah, great question. So with an organization such as yours, and why we had you come in with some stories is oftentimes, so I'll walk you through the process we use for like a company because it's the same process, but a little bit different for the sake of today because we've got a lot of different congregations that are here as well. But the idea is the why comes from the stories and experiences of all of us that are part of the organization. So sometimes in business, we have those founders and the why of the organization is based on the founder's why. That's fine. As a church, what we have is the opportunity to recognize of all of our combined experiences as one unit, what have we been at our best? So the idea is the why comes from the stories that we all share, that your congregation shares, which is why we had, I think Lorenzo mentioned you could have 2 people at minimum. We didn't want to have just one person from each congregation. We want to have at least a couple perspectives, up to 4, so you could have those richer conversations. If you want to go back and continue the conversation, we'll talk a little bit more about how you do that. But inviting those people who are deeply involved in the church and really know it inside and out. And I don't mean the church with the big C, but I mean your specific church who have been there maybe for years and just know inside and out who is contributing in the ways they are. Those people who have the stories and experience that can share those things, collaboratively as a group, we come up with what the why is based on what's really bubbling to the top. So good question, Ron. Do we have one more question?
Yeah, there was a great one, Matt, that said, so what if my why is significantly different than the parish's why?
Good question. So we have these things called nested whys. And so what you're working on today is actually a nested why to your overall, the Episcopal Church's why. Your nested why is your congregation's why underneath that helps to fulfill that larger one. And you, as a member of the church, you have your own nested why underneath that. And as long as your why contributes to the vision of the next one up, which contributes to the vision of the next one up, and helping build those, then it's okay that you don't have the same why. In fact, having different whys along the way actually gives us a big advantage because we can meet people where they're at and in different ways. And so I think it's really important that not everybody has the same exact why, but the idea is the why that we come up with today will be formed from the experience of the larger group that you're going to be working with and the stories that come out there that involve multiple people. So as long as it's not in conflict, which I can't imagine anyone here would have a why that's in conflict with what we would end up coming out with today. So should be good. Okay, excellent questions. I'm going to save some of these for the end because we have some space built in at the end for a final conversation. I'm wondering if we'll fill in the blanks on some of these in the meantime. But what I want to do now is let you stop listening to my voice so you can start using yours. Once you are in your breakout rooms, what we're going to do is have you share some stories. And I ask that each of you come prepared with at least a couple, because knowing that we had maybe some smaller groups and maybe some bigger groups, the idea was we want to have at least 4 stories that you share in your group. And what we're going to do is just have you share those stories. If you are a long talker like I am, maybe don't go first because you will have to self-regulate on time. And so if you know that about yourself, maybe have someone else start. But the idea is you are going to share a story that kind of answers this prompt. And so say just a specific story of when you felt most proud to be a member of your congregation. Now, what we're not talking about is, I'm proud because we stand for this. I'm proud because we hold these values. What I'm looking for are specific times, specific moments. Maybe you had a potluck or a fundraiser for somebody whose house burned down. Maybe someone in the community came to the door of the church and needed a place to stay. And someone in your congregation said, yes, come stay with me. Something like that, a moment in time that stands out in your memory of a time that basically was what you feel like your congregation stands for when it's at its best. And so think about that. If you didn't come in with a couple, hopefully that gives you some idea of what to share, what to think about, and maybe hearing someone else's stories when we get into these groups will get the juices flowing as well. Of maybe, oh, that reminds me of the time that, and great. But the idea is you're going to have about 20 minutes total in this small group to share your stories. So if you've got 4 people, that's about 5 minutes per single story, or 5 minutes per person. If you can squeeze in 2 stories, that's 2.5 minutes each. So that might be cutting it pretty close. But the idea is you'll have 20 minutes total, split it up however works best for you as a team. And if you can, would love to have you just keep track. If it's one person in the group keeping track, that's fine. But keep track of at least a title of each, like a running list of the titles of the stories that you shared. Because what we're going to do is we're going to revisit these in the coming exercises as well. So it'll be good to know which stories were told as you come back into them. And so, Lee, how are we doing on room assignments?
I'm looking good. I'm still going to need just another couple of minutes here to add everybody. And if you, so I'm looking for the renames are all good there. I'm just taking probably 2 more minutes, Matt.
Cool. So I will pause here and just ask, is this making sense so far? Is that you're just going to share stories? What you can do is go one at a time. So if you have 2 stories, you can, as a group, decide we want to share 2 at a time or not. But what you can also do is one person share a story, rotate. Next person share a story, rotate. And do that and just keep making laps around the group until time runs out. You are welcome to do that as well. But what we want to do is get a balanced perspective. What we don't want is that first person to take up 12 minutes telling one story, and then the next 3 people only have 8 minutes to split amongst them. So just be mindful. If someone in your group can just have their smartphone out and be your timer, that would be a great way to spend maybe that first minute, is just coordinating on who's going to be timing, who's going to be keeping track of these things, the titles as well. And we will be all set.
And those of you, just a reminder to trust the process. As I said at the beginning, even if it still seems a little bit unclear, how does this sort of lead from one to the other? It will happen. You just have to trust it a little bit here. If you still don't get it all together, just know that it's coming. And I know that Lee is renaming some of you right now and putting you into the rooms. And what's likely to happen is those of you who are on Android or iPhones, you're likely to be with us in this room for a little bit longer, like the one that says Galaxy, only because I didn't have the list of the congregations with their number to be able to put the name in there. So we'll sort it out. Most of you already have your numbers, which is great. If anyone is alone, does anybody know if you're alone from your congregation here with us today? Sort of raise your hand or chat or something, or unmute yourself. So most of you have at least one other person with you, because if not, I would jump in, and I don't have stories, but I would hear your stories and be with your stories and try to bring out more stories. And again, part of what we're trying to do here is to also teach you in a way that you can then go and try it with others as well. So you will be able to, and on the resource page that we'll give you at the end, you will have access to this recording. You will have access to the recording from Simon actually talking about the 18 minutes, talking about the golden circle, if you need a little bit more clarity on that, and then the next steps of the experiment. So we're going to walk with you every step of the way on this, but even this is part of us learning. As best I know, Matt, you guys have never done this for churches. So we're all doing this together as an experiment to try to figure it out. So, yeah.
I love that we're just a room of guinea pigs, and that's great. That's one of my favorite things. We're my life. Experimenting together, which is great. Cool. All right, Lee, I'm getting the thumbs up. Does that mean we're ready to put them into their breakout rooms?
We are. I didn't, let's do this real quick. So I'm going to drop the instructions in chat for you there. As Lorenzo said, there might be a few people that it's going to take just another minute. We'll get you into your rooms. So if you don't see your friends, don't worry. They will be coming if they're here in the greater place. And we'll get you into those places. You'll see a countdown clock up on your screen there once you go into the breakout rooms, and you can so you can watch your time effectively. I'll also send you some timing clues along the way. If you need any help at all, feel free to, there's a little button that will appear on the bottom of your screen there that says breakout, and you can click on the help button there, and that will get you, it'll send us a little message here, and you'll, and one of us will magically teleport back into there and help you out with that. Matt, everything else, we good?
Feels great. I love it. Let's get them talking.
All right, my friends, we've got 20 minutes on the clock here. Have fun.
where we want to go for the rest of the day, is taking these stories that we've shared and really digging into them. So what we want to do now is what we're going to have you do is see what is, there's kind of two pieces to every story from our perspective, and you're going to unearth both parts. And so let's start with the first part. So in every one of those stories, there was probably one big action that was taken at the heart of the story. I tell you what, before we hop into this, let's hear some examples, and then maybe I can give you some better illustrations. So I'm going to pause. Who had a story that they heard in their group that they would love to share with the larger group? I would love to hear maybe an example or two. So if anybody is willing to, just either raise your hand. I'll keep my eyes open. Okay, Ed and Rachel, if you don't mind, come off mute, and love to hear one of your stories.
Okay, so one of our stories is the following. Our church had a little blessing box. It's the size of a couple, 3 suitcases on the street that we filled with canned goods and things like that. Or people would come along and put clean out their pantries and fill up the blessing box. It was always getting emptied. And so we thought, well, this just isn't going to cut it. So we ended up affiliating ourselves with another local organization that's a partner with the Houston Food Bank. And so we started to do these mobile food pantries. You may have seen them. They look like large Budweiser trucks with the sides that roll up. And this was probably in December. This was in December, and we started to do them. And then we did a couple of test runs in December, and then our rector, the Reverend Suzanne, she came in and she said, well, how often are we going to do this? And I said, well, why don't we just do it every week? And she said, well, that seems like a little much, doesn't it? So nevertheless, we went ahead and started doing this every week. And we started out with maybe 15 or 20 volunteers. And we were doing it every week, and we were seeing 150 families come through, started getting up to 200 families. And then COVID hit. And the Houston Food Bank adopted a lot of the CDC policies that we had to enact ourselves. And we asked ourselves, can we do this? And sure enough, we did. We started doing it on a drive-through basis, and we were doing, we've been doing 400 families or more a week. And it suddenly dawned on us that while our church was empty across the street, and we have cars driving through, while our church was empty across the street, in the shadow of the church. Hey, we were doing church. We were actually doing church in the parking lot. We were essentially, we were feeding others and our own souls while we were doing that. And so that is the brief version of our story.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Who else? Let's hear one more story that came up in your groups. Who else wants to share maybe one of your favorite stories, maybe something that was new? Kristen, I see you raising your hand. Kristen Wheeler.
Sorry, guys. One thing that Jason and I shared is that last year, actually a little over a year ago in the fall, we started dinner church. I know that that's become kind of popular, started in New York and kind of has worked its way through the Episcopal Church and other faiths as well. And we have a really small congregation, but what happened was we had like a specific thing that happened is we had 2 new people in our church. And what that did was really open them up. So when you're in kind of regular church, people can be uncomfortable or, not ready to like voice themselves. And the dinner church atmosphere allowed them to have a more personal church experience and to see how much that they've grown from that specific experience. Now they're like very involved in our church. They started their own ministry, just kind of like growth from that. it's something seemingly small, but just so big for such a small congregation. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that really is a good kind of lead in to this next thing that I want us to focus on, which is, looking at those past couple of stories. There was an action that was taken in each of those stories. So doing the mobile food pantries, right? Feeding people. Also in this last story, we had, creating a space for people to open up, right? Creating like a personal experience for people. So the idea is, looking back at your stories, what I want you to do now is go back through those stories one by one. We're going to give you about 10 minutes. Doesn't need to be anything huge. But the question you're going to be answering is, in each of those stories, what was the specific contribution that the church made to the lives of those involved? So think about it as the action that was taken. And I loved the way that they said, I think you said, feeding the soul of the people in the community. So maybe feeding the soul, right? That's maybe the action. Creating personal spaces for people, creating space for growth. Maybe that's another one for those dinner churches. So don't necessarily think about it as just that like specific, but maybe at the next level up, what was kind of the bigger action that was taken? And think about it in the form of a verb, right? You could say to blank, or you could just write it as a blank, like as a verb itself. So feeding the souls, or to feed the souls of people in the community, things like that. So that's what we're gonna have you do. Go story by story and pick out, what do you think the big action was? And have a conversation with the people in your group. What do you think the big one was? If there were multiple, like if your story was kind of big and there was a couple of different meaningful actions, sure, write them both down. But think about, what was the big, most meaningful action that was taken within the story that really drove an impact? And we'll get to the impact later, but think about the action that you took in each of those stories. So take about 10 minutes. What I would encourage each of you to do is, we had one person kind of write down the titles of the stories so you can keep them in track. What I'd encourage each of you to do is, if you have paper handy, just hand write down the themes, these action themes as you go along, so that you can keep a running list. Because eventually you'll each get a chance to kind of take a look at the list on your own, and you don't want to have to worry about sharing a screen or anything like that when you get there. So that's what we'll have you do right now. Lee, how do we feel about getting them into the groups and having them look at those contributions?
We are ready, my friend. Just a quick reminder, if you need any help while you're in there, click on the button that says breakouts, and then you can click the help button, and one of us will jump in with you and help you out. Also, I've posted the instructions in chat. That chat will stay with you throughout this entire process, so you can refer to that to see those instructions and the timing on this and all the other breakout rooms that we'll do. Plus, feel free to take notes in there, because I'll teach you at the very end how to save that chat so you can download it directly to your computer.
Number 30 are wearing the same shirt. So apparently there's like a memo or something about St. Margaret's.
Team players, that's what I hear from there. Absolutely.
They thought it was a competition or something today. Yeah, we're here to win. Oh, it's about us.
Yeah. Just waiting to see someone in jerseys show up,
That's right.
with their squad name on it. I love that. Cool. Well, I would love to, and you don't have to come off mute, but would love to, maybe if you pop in the chat, what were some of the big themes that you saw, maybe on a couple of the different stories that popped up? So if you want to just type those into the chat, showing up, love that. Connect, great. Being relevant. Oh, I'm sure there's a story behind that. Honor people's stories. Yes. Inviting. Great. Building bridges, welcoming, feeding, invite, welcome, connect. Love that. I'm seeing some common themes across multiple congregations. This is great. Great. Love this. Okay. Well, you've clearly got a handle on what we're going for here. This is fantastic. Well, here's what we're going to do next. And if you have people who join back later, I'm sure you can catch them up, because it will be a very similar experience to what you just had in this last breakout. So what you just talked about in our last conversation was the action that we took, right? So invite, like I see invitation to innovate, reflect, transform, integrate, to listen, right? Those kinds of verbs. So now what I want you to do is, taking each of those verbs into account, think about and have a conversation around, what was the impact that made? So thinking about that specific contribution, that specific action, what did that create for people? So for example, going back to our original couple of stories here, you know, we mentioned the dinner church. I thought that was a great example of the action was creating the experience, creating the environment that was personal for the person. The result, the impact of that was that opened them up. It helped them grow. She mentioned both of those things, right? So what we're looking for now is that as you go back down your list of those stories and those contributions, those actions, is now to think about what did that action lead to? What was the impact that was generated by that contribution? So another way of looking at that is when you did that thing, what did that allow the people in that story, the people in the community, the people who you touched in that story, what did it allow them to go on to do or to be or to become? So think about how people's lives were different or what you hoped. You may not have proof of it, but what you hope was the effect, what your intention of doing that was. What are you hoping for people? How would you like people's lives to be different after they interacted, after you took that action? So just, you're gonna go back down that list of the contributions that you just made, and to have a discussion around, okay, what do we think the impact was of that action that we took? And just have 10 minutes just like last time and focus in. And don't get caught up in, it can be tempting sometimes to go, well, when this happens, by dictionary definition, this is usually what happens. Think about it in the specific context of your stories. Really think about it in the illustrated example, because that's where the connection's going to come in, and that's where the real power of it is. So go back down your list. We'll pop the instructions here in the chat. And what you'll be doing is just go down that list of contributions, and for each contribution you have listed, what was the impact that that had on the people that it touched? Okay. All right, you're going to get 10 minutes to have those conversations and come up with that list. I forgot to mention last time, Lee did a great job of mentioning it in the chat, but we'll give you a 2-minute warning. With the last couple of minutes, what I'd love you to do, and if you didn't get a chance to do this last round, you can still do that maybe with that last 2 minutes as well, is to vote on what do we think the top 3 are. So you had that list of contributions that you made in round 1. If you didn't get a chance, maybe take a minute off the top and say, what do we think the top 3 contributions are that maybe showed up in multiple stories or the action, or when we think about it in the context of our church, these are the big ones that pop up to us, so vote on those. And then you're gonna do that at the end of this round as well. So with your last couple of minutes, vote on what you think those top 3 impacts are. So anything else to add, Lee, before we Star Trek beam them aboard their breakout rooms?
I think we're ready, my friend.
Excellent. Well, let's get rolling then. We will see you in about 10 minutes. Right now, what I want to talk about is preparing us for the next step in the process. So you've been exploring these stories. You know there are more stories to be heard, but probably in these, you got some strong themes that stood out that will probably resonate across the more stories you hear. They'll be reflected in those is probably my guess. And so the idea now is to, hopefully you had your chance to vote for your top 3s. If not, we're giving you a lot more time in this next round. So you can do some more voting there. In fact, Lee, I think I have in the instructions 15. Let's make it 20 on this next round. So we're going to give you 20 minutes in this next round. So you'll have some time to, if you didn't have a conversation finished, you are able to do that. If you still need to vote on some things, you can still do that. But going into this next conversation is the most important conversation, arguably, because this is where we start to put these pieces together. And so we're going to talk about what a why statement is. And so when we work with organizations and individuals, and I encourage you to think about this as at a personal level as well, because each one of you has your own golden circle, which means you have your own why that works very much the same in that it represents you at your very best. And the components are exactly the same for an individual as they are for an organization, as they are for a company or a church, which is there's 2 pieces that make it inspiring. And so oftentimes when we have an organization or a charismatic leader, what we end up is with kind of two buckets, right? You have this first person who is the visionary, or these companies that are very vision focused, and they go, this is the world that we're building towards. This is where we want to go someday. And you go, that's so awesome. Yes, I want that too. But how do we get there? And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the mission people, and the mission people go, I am the best at this thing. We are number one in this region. We have all the statistics to prove it. And you go, cool, but so what, right? What are you working towards? Why is that important that you do that? And so when we look at creating an inspiring why statement, something that your people can get behind, that a community can get behind, that you can be inspired by every single day, no matter what you do, when we look at articulating that, we try and get pieces of both. And you kind of already did that. And those two pieces are, you guessed it, contribution. So that first part that we did, you explored what was the action that we take when we're at our best. So think about it as, what do we add or contribute to the lives of the people around us? I like to say, what's that gift you're really skilled at giving and inspired when you do it? You can think about it that way as well. And then when you do that thing, when you give that gift, what's the impact that it has? What's the effect that it makes? The difference that you hope to make in the lives of the people around you by making that contribution. When you give that gift, what's the world that you're trying to create? And when we have both of those pieces in one statement, what you have is not only the finish line that we're running towards, but the racing lanes that your church specifically takes to get there. How do we help build towards that vision? And so this is secretly what we've been helping you kind of hopefully get your pieces at least in a row, because what we're going to have you do is take the ones that stand out the most, that really are representative of when we're at our best. Doesn't mean the other ones aren't important. We're actually going to talk about what the remaining themes go towards. But when we're at our best, here's the thing that we do and the difference that it makes. And that's what we'll work towards with this why statement. And it will be in a format that looks a little bit like this. Pretty easy. This is like our V1, if you want to think about it as the training wheels version, absolutely fine to do that. But this really just helps you visualize, we exist to insert your contribution, the thing that we do when we're at our best, so that the difference that it makes, that impact. And it helps you see, is there a clear connection between the two? Sometimes we have a temptation to look at our contributions and our impacts, and kind of why I had you upvote or pick those top ones that resonate is because it's really hard to narrow them down. And sometimes we'll try and Frankenstein two themes together that don't necessarily go together. And so when you have it in this format, it's very clear that we do this thing so that this outcome happens. And so that's what you're actually going to be trying to do next. But don't worry, we're going to walk you through, I'll give you some examples. I'm also going to give you some guidelines to help kind of hone the language. Sometimes we put the pressure on ourselves to sum ourselves up in a tweet, right? Like this has to be everything that is important to us and about us. It's okay. You've got a full golden circle. Don't worry about putting all of that in there. Your hows are just as important as your why, which is just as important as your whats. Balance across all three levels is very necessary, but we just have to start with why, because that's going to give us the clarity, is the filter, kind of our North Star of how we make decisions on how we move forward. And so here are some, I made that example earlier from the theater group. This is how they would have ended up with their why statement, which is to give people a sense of confidence so that we can each live our lives as authentically and fully as possible, right? Taking those things that they had, those realizations early on in the conversation, using their own experience to inform the action that they took and the difference that it made for those people. And you'll come up with your own version of this as well in a moment. So here are some like 5 kind of principles and guidelines, and I'll keep these up on the screen when it's time for you to start working. But these can hopefully help you kind of refine the words and make it a little more, well, let's say simple and clear. Let's start there. Make it a little bit more concise. Like I said, don't worry about cramming all of the themes in. Doesn't mean they're going to go away. They are just as important. We have those other 2 levels of the golden circle that maybe they could just be relocated to. So keep it simple, keep it clear. When at our best, here's the thing that we do for people at a high level and the difference that we're hoping that it makes for people. Then keep those what's out of there. there is sometimes a temptation. I'm not worried as much about this group because as a church, we are very much outward community focused, but sometimes we have the temptation to identify a specific recipient or audience or a specific place where we're allowed to do that thing. And if you just pull that away, if we don't restrict it to our congregation, if we don't restrict it to our families, if we don't restrict it to the products that we have or the way that it manifests, like the church services and things like that, if we take those away, what we actually have is an opportunity to live our why more fully and more freely. So we encourage you to take those what's out of there that might restrict you in where you can live this why. Next, it is in service of people. We used to say in service of others, but what we find is that, and I'm sure this is probably the case with a lot of the people in your congregation, is the thing that we get the most fulfillment out of giving to others is often the thing that we generally need the most ourselves, because we know how good it feels when we get that thing. And so when we say it, when we phrase it as a service-oriented sentence, what we're really doing is including yourself in that, because you also need that. So keep it inclusive, use we language, things like that, but it will be in service. It stands for something instead of against something. There are a ton of great causes out there that are to eradicate poverty, to end world hunger, those kinds of things, to fight against injustice, all noble, great causes. But at the same time, if that is your why, that means you have to suit up for battle every single time you want to be at your best. And so what does it look like in the off season? How do we put that in the affirmative so that you can do it all the time? So instead of fighting against injustice, maybe it's standing up for what's right. Maybe instead of to end poverty, it's to feed the hungry. Those kinds of things. Just that small change gets you focused on what we can do, what we want to build towards, instead of what we don't want. So keep it framed in something positive. And finally, and this is really what you want to get to in the conversation with your groups, is it's got to feel right and inspire you. It may feel small at first, and that's okay, right? If we're trying to say just clearly, here is the thing that we do when we're at our best, you may kind of feel like it's not enough, and that's okay. This is step one, right? Let's start with this. Let's start with what feels most right. Let's see if we can make it feel more inspiring, depending on those examples that you use. Use the language, use what really comes naturally to you. But that should be your ultimate gut check, is does this feel the most right? And then we'll start there. And if things need to evolve, they can absolutely evolve. But version one, if you can keep it simple and clear, pull the what's out of there, just keep it at a human level, make it in service of people, make it for something instead of against something. And if it feels right, we can start there and you're in a really good spot. Like I said at the beginning, we're hoping to get the essence, get you in the ballpark. You may only get to third base, right? Or even second base. That's okay. You can hit a double today. That'll put you in good shape for when you go back and have more conversations. Totally fine. I'll give you some examples, and I'm doing these in order of one that, and this is another real world example, the first version versus maybe some iterations based on kind of those rules, those guidelines. So this first one needs a little bit of work. So this was with a law firm that we worked with, and this was their initial why statement after they did some of the story sharing and things like that, which was to defeat the opposition to our clients so that we can create a higher quality of life for our employees, clients, and greater communities. Very technical sounding. This sounds very business speaky. We can all agree on that. But additionally, let's go through the rules. Is it very simple and clear? It's a little clunky, right? I'm seeing some head shaking. I agree. I think there's a lot going on here, so we could probably shore that up a bit. Looks like we might have some what's in there, right? So I talked about, does this restrict where you can live this? Probably. Clients mean we only do it for the people who pay us, right? So we've got clients there. Employees, clients, and greater communities, right? Why are we calling out those specific ones when sounds like what we're just really saying is people, right? Those kinds of things. Those are some what's. Is it in service? I would say in a way, right? It's service of their clients, so it's a very small group that it's in service of, but it's in service. Is it in affirmative language? No, I see some head shaking. No, correct, right? Defeat the opposition. We're talking about the thing we stand against. So how can we focus that on what we stand for? And I can tell you, when they got to this stage, it felt right, but it definitely did not inspire them. So we kept working, kind of talked through some of these things, and this is the second version that they came out with. This was almost there. And so the second version was to defend our clients and win our cases so that our clients, employees, and communities can thrive. So still the same essence in those two, contribution and the impact, but is this a little more simple and clear? I would say so, yeah. Free of what's. We're still stuck on some of our what's here. We're having a hard time letting those go. That's okay. Is it in service? I would say so, right? In service, defending the clients, serving the clients' communities and employees. Yep. Affirmative language. Yep. Defending employees. I mean, that's kind of borderline, but it's still, I'd say it counts because we're focusing on the employees instead of the enemy. And they were still, this one felt more right, was more inspiring, but didn't get it. I will tell you right now, if you walked away with something that was this percentage right, as far as these guidelines, you're in good shape. Honestly, I can tell you that today. If you walked out with something along these lines, I mean, not with the legal stuff, but your own version of it, you'd be in good shape. So don't worry, don't stress. But then we got them to the strongest version. And the strongest version really was when we really focused on those what's, really got into what do you stand for when you're at your best? What can we do? This is what they came up for, was to stand up for the underrepresented so that everyone can have an equal chance at justice. And that, once they had that, suddenly, I see hands go up, like I got goosebumps just reading that. Imagine the people who were involved in those stories that led to those themes, right? And so is this much more simple and clear? Absolutely. Free of what's, right? We've taken out specific audiences. Stand up for the underrepresented could kind of be a what, but it's not that specific. So I'd say you can get away. Everyone can have an equal chance at justice. Now we've gone to just people. Love it. In service, absolutely. In affirmative language, to stand up for the underrepresented, absolutely. And I can tell you that this checked both of those final boxes for them. Felt right and inspired them. So that's what we're working towards. You won't start off perfect. I'll share with you a little bit later my personal why journey and the iterations of that. And I can tell you that's been a journey in its own. But this is step one. So what I want you to do now is you are going to actually take a first pass by yourself. And this is kind of why I wanted you to have those themes written down. If you don't have all of them written down or memorized, just try and go off of memory of the conversations that you just had. But I want you to just take a few minutes and think about those top themes that you had the discussions around. And if you didn't get the voting done, like I said, that's okay. Which ones felt like they resonated the most with you? And Lee just dropped the instructions into the chat. But try and take your first pass. We'll give you a few minutes here to just go through and say, what do I think the why statement is based on the examples that I just heard, this format, and kind of these guidelines. So take a couple of minutes here by yourself. It's going to be a super awkward silence, and it's going to be great. So we'll just lean into that. But take some time and think about it, because this is really just to inform, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. The idea is this will inform the conversation that you have with the bigger group when you get back into your duo, trio, or quartet, if you will. What each of you comes in with will give you kind of just a basis of what do we think it is, so that way when we get in there, we're not starting from a blank slate. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. It doesn't have to be perfect, like I said. Just think about, what do I think the why statement is for our team based on the conversations, the stories that I heard, the themes that we pulled out, both contribution and impact, what feels most right. And then once we have that, we'll go into the conversation with our bigger groups, and you can compare, contrast, say, ooh, I love that. Maybe not this. Oh, I like yours better than mine. That's great. Let's go with that. You can have those conversations as well. So I'll give you another minute and a half. Doesn't have to be anything big.
If you have any questions, you're welcome to post those in the chat and we can answer those as well.
It's about 30 seconds. And it's okay if you just go, I think this theme goes here and this theme goes here, and I'm going to leave the team to come up with the best words for it. That's totally okay too. What I'll have you do is just wrap up what you have now. knowing it doesn't have to be perfect, knowing that the idea is now we're going to go to the fun part. So let's go back into our groups and let's have a conversation around what you came up with. So what we're going to do now is I will drop the instructions into the chat, and you're going to have, oh, Lee beat me, right. So you're going to have 20 minutes, and we will run the clock from here, and you will have 20 minutes to go around. I would recommend have each person just share, go one at a time. Here's the why that I wrote. Here's a bit of context and some reasoning, and then go on to the next person. And then once everybody's had a chance to share what they think the why statement is, then just have a conversation. What did we love? Who's really stood out? You know, maybe we can come up with what draft 2 is, and then by the time we come back, so maybe by that 5 minutes remaining mark, really see if you can get in together on what do we think this second version is, that we would be comfortable taking back to the church with what we came up with today. And so work on that second version, and be prepared to share. Would love to hear some examples too when you get back in here. I'm sure your fellow church members would love to hear what you come up with as well, especially in the different regions. Would love to hear some examples from what other people are finding. So Lee, anything to add before we pop them into their final breakout room of the day?
Just a quick reminder that your chat stays with you. So I put the breakout instructions there so you can refer back to those. Also, that might be a good way to get your why draft statements over to each other and keep track of those too. So you can see the words that other people use and be able to mix and match those just a little bit. So that might be helpful for you.
Yeah, great call out. The chat box is very helpful for at least visualizing what someone is thinking. So yeah, if you get in there, type it down and send it to your group, that would be great. Great call, Lee.
Wonderful. All right, if we're ready, I'll send us off for 20 minutes, and a reminder to give you the timing. Again, if you need any help, hit that breakout button and then the help button.
Love it.
Here we go.
See you in 20 minutes. So what I see some of you are already beating me there, but would love to see some shared. What did you all come up with? What were some of those second drafts? We have some amazing ones here: to envision welcoming spaces so that people can connect around shared values in order to better our community. Love that. Honor people's stories so that we can all share our authentic, oops, sorry, I scrolled up on it, our authentic selves, journeying as transformed people of God. Love it. So we've got some really great why statements coming in here. Together in community so that people feel loved and have fun. Yes, yes, yes. Fantastic. So these are so great. Let's have some people actually share. So I know we've shared in the chat. Anybody want to share what they came up with? Do they like love what you came up with and want to kind of, all right, I see Jill. Do you mind coming off mute, sharing what you came up with, and then a little bit about the background?
Because we just had a wonderful time doing this, and we came up with something that we really do believe kind of covers what we are. We came up with welcome and inspire one another to love and care for God's beloved community, because we do believe that it's not just about our church, it's about the whole community. So that is where we're heading.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Also, Melissa loves your hair, so that she just popped out in the chat. So a lot of love, a lot of love. And usually I only talk about Lee's hair on these calls. So that's pretty awesome.
I was going to comment as a hairdressing teacher. Lee, I love your hair.
Right back at you, Jill. Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
Lee always likes to kick off by saying he's so excited it's coming out of his head. Yeah. So yeah.
That's true.
Can Jill repeat that one more time, please?
I sure can. To welcome and inspire one another to love and care for God's beloved community.
Thank you.
Love it.
I love it.
Well done.
I heard maybe a little R&D going on there with Linda. R&D, of course. We all know what R&D stands for. That's right. Rip off and duplication. That's even funnier because I stole that joke.
Oh, no, we share here. We share.
There you go. That's right. All right. Well, I think I saw Betty and Karen hands. Did I see that correct?
Got Betty in person, and I got Susan raising her hand as well. So.
Ed.
All right. Well, let's kick us off.
So what we came up with was to enable a sense of joy and hospitality that can be taken outside the church walls.
Nice. I love it. I love it. Some things to keep in mind too, as I'm seeing some of these and I'm hearing it, is the distinction, and for the continued work on your whys as we go forward, is a way to think about it with your contribution is the thing you absolutely have 100% control over. And the impact is the thing you're hoping happens. And so can you read that to me one more time?
Yes, to enable a sense of joy and hospitality that can be taken outside the church walls. And that came from us having one of the things we're most excited about is when we can join spontaneously after a service and we gather around a piano and there's some fiddling music and people dance, and I live in a place where lives are pretty hard. And so when we're able to engender that sort of sense of joy, and then people leave after lingering and smiling, that's sort of where that came from.
I love it. That's fantastic. And I see also even another contribution there of connection, to connect people. Connect people to either each other, music, anything like that. So that's fantastic. Love it. Well, thank you for sharing. Do we want to share, Lee, you said there was one other hand that...
Yeah, Susan was fast to have her hand up virtually there. So let's...
Okay. All right. We're constructing a community kitchen addition to our building. So ours is to envision welcoming spaces so that people can connect around shared values in order to better our community.
I love it.
And,
fantastic.
And we want to improve our town and have everyone in the town welcome to our kitchen.
That's great. What do you mind sharing a little bit of kind of the context as Betty and Karen did? What was some of the context that kind of informed? Was there a specific story where one of those themes popped up?
Well, this is well, actually the stories are more of our hosting teas and lessons and carols, and then our link to Crossway, which is a substance abuse center that we minister to. So the community kitchen sprung out of our listening to what the community needed. So we took about a year to ask all different groups and people in the community what they wanted for a kitchen. And it's changed numerous times. And we finally got an architectural drawing of the kitchen, which is really cool.
It's awesome. I love that. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it.
Some good things that we're seeing in the chat too, and some of I've just been reading through a few of these as well while you're sharing those things. I'd love to see all the inclusive language has been awesome. So, and that's no big surprise, I don't think, to see, but it's about more than just us, which is wonderful. So we can see, the we are through, with people, those type of things. Those are all really fantastic. I want to be a little cautionary about making it be a little too, maybe call it mission focused, or there's a what in there. So when thinking about just about the kitchen, for in this case, so we're building a kitchen, that's wonderful. And I like the idea of that, but I'm hoping to know what that kitchen represents, because in 2 years or maybe less, of course, when the construction's done on that project, what else is there? So we don't, a why tends to be something that's infinite. So it's probably something that that we can't ever truly achieve, in that it's going to be way into the future compared to like a mission, which would be a step towards that why, where we would be, okay, in 2 years we'll have this complete, or something along those lines. I saw another one up there too about developing a program. Okay, what happens once that program's developed? So good way to just sort of to think about those in those terms.
I love that. Great call out. And I think even just thinking about it is your why is something you will never be done doing. It's impossible for you to be done doing it. You will never be able to check it off. You'll be able to know when you're building towards it, but you'll never actually be done doing it because there's just so much, like Lee said, infinite opportunity to live it. I will have Dixie had her hand raised a couple of times, so I'm going to have Dixie share as our last person. So bring us home, Dixie.
Okay. Well, we actually did 3 because we thought we were supposed to do 3. Do you want me to just
gotcha.
pick one or?
Yeah, pick your favorite one and just go
No,
with that.
Which one of your kids is your favorite too? Tell us
I
that.
only have one
later.
child, so it makes it really easy, and we always tell her she's our favorite daughter.
Yeah, that's fair. No, you can read all 3 if you like.
Okay. We feed people body, mind, and soul so that we ourselves are fed and all can grow together as one community.
Mm.
We welcome others in a way that allows them to be truly seen and known as a member of our community.
Mm.
Hand in hand, we participate in a multicultural community representative of God's vision.
Nice. Nice. I love that. So these are we just saw them popped into the chat box. Excellent.
Yeah. So I guess if you want the background, we have we live in a kind of an urban marginalized community, and so we have a pantry and a breakfast ministry. The breakfast has been 22 years every Saturday feeding the community. Anybody that comes to the door. The pantry's probably been 40 years, and so we've converted it to a grab and go. And we were just discussing that one of the things that we feel is that people, we make a point to greet people and call them by their name, and that people feel welcomed, that even when they have problems, they always come back and tell us about their problems. And in my experience in wealthier churches, when people get divorced or something, sometimes they disappear, but our people, when they fall off the wagon or get back on drugs, tend to come back. And so that part about allows them to be truly seen and known for who they are seems to be important. And then that idea of being fed, and that we're fed by them, and that it's not just about feeding their stomachs, it's feeding holistically, are important to who we are. And again, we're very multicultural. We have a bilingual community, and we're dominant Spanish, but also African American, and there's 100 and some languages in our neighborhood. So.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing. And seeing these up here together actually gives me it's a nice segue into the next thing I was going to touch on. And so I think just from your explanation there, Dixie, I see the same essence bleeding through all 3 of those with just a couple of different manifestations. I think that second one really kind of at the highest level captured a lot of what you just mentioned. And the next thing I want to share is a little bit around hows. And I actually see a couple of hows potentially in here. And so what's the difference between a why and a how? And so when we talk about the why, what we're talking about is when we're at our best, here's the thing that we do and the difference that it makes. The how is how you show up, the things that you do, the habits that you have that make you most effective at doing that thing. And so when I look at this list, I actually see really great, right? Like at a high level, we welcome others, or maybe we have some finessing there that incorporates some of that other pieces. We welcome people so that they feel truly seen and known as members of our community. How we do that, we feed their body, mind, and soul. We participate in a multicultural community. Right. So those are the habits, or the kind of like values put into practice that you exhibit that make you really effective at living your why. And so that's just an idea of how you could potentially still use some of these themes, and they're doing it in a meaningful way. And so I'll talk a little bit about hows. It's as if you queued us up for it perfectly. So thank you. I'll give you your 20 later. All right. So let's talk a little bit about hows, because this is where community and culture combine in any team, church, congregation, organization, any of these things. So this is where the culture there is shaped, because it's how we show up for each other. And the good news is you've got a head start on how you get there if you want to. If you choose to follow on this path and work on your hows, you've actually got a good head start. And because the non-why themes, so the themes that you came to, especially if you look at your list of contribution themes, those first round of themes that you pulled, they're already kind of in that action form, right? And so they already look a little bit like the habits that make you effective at living your why. And so it's those non-why themes that are still important, but may not be in the why, look at those themes to inform what are the habits that we have as a community, as a congregation, that keep us at our best and make us really effective at living our why. They are not less important, just like your what's. The church is a what. It is not less important than the why or anything like that, right? They are all equally important. So keep that in mind. But these are kind of your core values or guiding principles, your code of conduct as a unit, if you will. These are the things that you believe in and live and breathe on a daily basis. The habits and behaviors that keep you operating at your best and make you really effective at delivering on your why. And this is where relationships live in any organization. So think about the people in your life that you choose to spend time with, the people who you have a really good relationship with. Oftentimes it has nothing, they probably don't even have the same what's that you do. Maybe they have a different job, maybe they live somewhere else, different ways they spend their time. But probably how they show up for you either is in line with your hows or is very complementary towards them, right? So the way that they show up, the values that they embody and practice in relationship with you resonates with the way that you approach things as well. We as an organization, our why is really all around creating safe spaces for people where we want people to wake up inspired, to go to work, feel safe while they're there, and come home at the end of the day feeling fulfilled. We partnered with an organization that had a very similar why, but we couldn't get aligned on how we delivered that work. And it wasn't because either of us was wrong. It was just because the way that we prioritized our hows, the way we showed up throughout was very different, and it was just in conflict. Neither one of us was right. It's just the way that it happened. And that's also why I talked about earlier, maybe people gravitate towards a certain church because of the way that the congregation members show up. And so this is where relationship lives, because it's how we show up for each other. So think about those habits as well as you continue on this journey. Speaking of continuing on the journey, let's talk a little bit about how you can take this experience back and potentially, if you want to keep going, if you're like, I still would like more stories or more perspectives and then working on our church's why, here's how you can do it. Essentially, replicate the experience that you had here. So the first thing that you'll want to do, and you've got the slides in the handout once you leave that can give you kind of the walkthrough of the questions and prompts. But the idea is you've already got this why statement that you're feeling pretty good about. What you can do is bring in a small group. So how we have other organizations roll this out is we say, find those groups of those advocates, those really active people in your church, on your teams, the people who are really, I think in organizations, we call them the culture zealots. If everyone was just like so-and-so, we'd be in such better shape than we are. You can think about those people in your congregation of, if everybody was just like so-and-so, we'd be able to generate so many more events and things like that. Think about those people who are like truly involved, truly dedicated, really invested, know the people, know the church, and invite them in. Doesn't have to be someone in a leadership position. Could be someone, a young person in your youth group who just grew up in the church and has a lot of those stories as well. Bring them from across a full cross section of that group of people that you are in community with, and have them share some of their stories with that same prompt. When have you been most proud to be a member of this congregation? Share some examples. What were some specific times that stand out in your mind? And hearing those stories, you can start to hear the themes that are pulling out. You've already been through the experience. You know what you're looking for, right? What's the contribution here? What's the impact? And you can kind of lead that conversation. And then once they get through with kind of sharing those things out, maybe you can lead them through some contribution mining, some impact mining, get them to share those kinds of things out. And then chances are, so if you found some stories that were really well representative of that group in here, they're going to come out with some of those themes that pop out as well that you found today. And you can say, oh, interesting that you found this. Interesting that this also was a theme that came out for you during your stories. Because guess what? We came up with a why statement, and you can talk about what the structure of a why statement is, what a why statement represents, and then you can point back to what you came up with. And now they can connect with it because they've seen it in action. So that's the idea, is when people can see it, when they know the stories that involve the themes, when they can feel the contribution and impact, because they can, even if they weren't there firsthand, hearing the stories that other people share has a ton of power. So getting the conversation going with some story sharing is a really powerful way to bring this back. If you want to continue iterating, you can bring that information in and maybe even tweak the language if you like. Or you can use it to reinforce maybe what you've already come to if you feel really confident and comfortable with the language that you've come to. So that's a way to throw that in there. Lee, anything else to add on helping people connect with the message when they get back?
I just love that this doesn't have to be the only conversation that we have about this. So absolutely, great ways to continue those connections going forward.
Yeah, love it. And just remember, and like I said, this will be in the handout. Lorenzo's already building something fantastic for you to all access, which will have the handout on there. But when you think about contribution, think about it as when we're at our best, that thing that we give to the people that we touch, the action that we take. And when we do that, what's the impact? And then the impact is what is the world we're trying to build? What are we trying to create for these people or empower them to do, be, or feel? And so that's how you can have those conversations and host them with your groups and organization. And you can make it collaborative as well. All right, let me pause my share really quick. Actually, no. Well, one last thought, because I want to have some space for us to just chat about things. What's some next steps? What are some questions you might still have? But first, just a reminder, this is a process. So it's actually a great idea to go back, and even if you feel good about where you landed on your why statement, to get other people's voices in the conversation. You might hear that one word that you go, oh my gosh, that's the one. We couldn't think of it that day. That's the word. So have those conversations anyway, because I can share from my own experience. It's a process. So I discovered my why in 2014. So 6 years ago, summer of 2014, actually, which is kind of funny. And I came out of that why discovery not super inspired. Like, I knew it was in the ballpark. I knew it was the right essence, but the first draft just did not inspire me. And this is what I came to, which was to inspire others so that they can become the best versions of themselves. I knew that the core of it was correct, but it's not something I would go around, and if someone was like, oh, what was your why? I'd be like super excited to say, right? So it was something that I had to, and I was just sharing this with Lorenzo when we were, when everyone was in the breakout rooms, but something that I had to really look at and surround myself with and say, and I had to put it on Post-it notes so that I would be bothered enough by the phrasing that I didn't like, that it would force me to do something about it. And so I put it on my email signature, even though I didn't love it. And the repeated exposure and doing that got me to a place where I knew what I needed to change. And it was this specifically, first of all, I needed to change the word inspire, because it didn't feel right for me. So I actually was walking by a storefront one morning on my way to work, and a new office had opened, and it was a creative agency, and they called themselves Catalyst Creative. And I was like, Catalyst, that's the word. So then I re-engineered, and I went to catalyze growth in people so that we have the tools to build a better world. Both kind of same essence you can see related between 1 and 2. More clarity came just through more time, more conversation. And then this year, actually in January, I went back through and had more conversations, told a couple of more stories, because I still didn't feel that deep connection to this one. And now, right now, what I currently have is to catalyze meaningful mind shifts that help us live more intentionally. And that, to me, is representative of me across the board. That's what I love to do. That's what I love when people do that for me. And this took me 6 years. So I'm just saying, remember, this is step 1. You have permission to hit the eraser button. Just make sure you're staying on core. You're not just changing it for the sake of changing it, or changing it because, ooh, that's going to sound better on a poster. This is meant for you to use as a decision-making mechanism, as a filter, not for a marketing campaign or anything like that. Give yourself some grace along the way. You're great at giving others grace. Give yourself some grace as well. So I will pause now and just open it up. We've got about 10 minutes. What's still on heart and mind for the group? Lorenzo, if you've got anything to share as well.
Yeah, I'll begin because I think this is related to the question that Kelly Grace had asked in the chat. about it becoming too churchy. And maybe you can use the story about the difference between knowing what your why is and how you use different words with different people, the airplane story.
Yeah. So as I kind of just mentioned, the why is it's primarily for internal use. I was sharing with these two that there are some of our igniters on the team who are our speakers that have, especially when I first joined the team, they would say, when I get on a plane, generally when you sit by a stranger, what's the first thing that they ask you? What do you do? Right? That's like the quintessential party question, sitting next to a stranger on a bus or a plane question, any of those kinds of things. And so to get in the habit of using their why, they would share their why. And I've just never been comfortable enough, even with the version that I love now, I don't feel like I would be like, they're like, what do you do for a living? Oh, I catalyze meaningful mind shifts that help people live more intentionally. Like I would feel very weird doing that in a public setting. But something I feel better about is taking that essence and tailoring it to the audience. So not changing the message, but I have said on a couple of occasions, I give people aha moments for a living, or I help people in organizations be more intentional with how they move through the world. And that can start a conversation. And if that starts a conversation, great. Maybe this is someone who believes what I believe, who wants to see that same world come to light. If they're like, oh, okay, cool, that conversation is ended, and then I don't have to worry about it. Like it's a win-win. So I say that to say, this is not something that, Lee joked earlier of like putting a tattoo on. This isn't something that you're gonna like wrap the church bus in, put it on a poster everywhere. The idea is you use this to inform how you now move forward, how you articulate it to different communities, and also how you just make decisions around how we approach the things that we do within the church, the things that we choose as far as causes, partnerships, those kinds of things. So yeah, does that help illustrate that?
And how you do your videos, because remember, this is all part of a 3-step process to create this. We wanted to take this time, which is now coming to an end, but we wanted to take this time to help you clarify your mission. This doesn't necessarily mean that's not what you're going to make a mission. When you see commercials for Coca-Cola, you don't see their mission statement up on the right there, but it's based upon what they're doing to get you people. So when you're making the video for the crowdfunding, which also will serve as an evangelistic tool for you, you want to be able to tell your why through the stories that you will tell in the video. And we have tools to help you do this, to create the video. Those stories that you select will be to reinforce that why, because that's the why that you want the world to know about. That's what you want your community and others to know about you. So that in this case, they'll support you financially, but also it helps you get out there why your place matters. Why this isn't just a disembodied theology out in the world or spirituality, but rather we're the incarnate Jesus in the world today. And this is how we're doing that. This is our charism. Now I'm talking about using churchy words. Now Matt and Lee are all like, whoa, now he's going a little out there.
I grew up disciples of Christ, so I'm comfortable with churchy words. So it's all good with me.
So, but this is what now happens, right? We don't expect you that you will walk from here today and have exactly the words you want to use. It's like new shoes, if you will. You have to walk in them for a little bit. You have to see like, how are they feeling? You have to break them a little bit. And second of all, there might even be parts of it that aren't right. As the example Matt used earlier in our conversation was like, sometimes some of the words feel like a little stone. Is like, and you have to walk in it enough to know like which part is bothering me, which part is not feeling right. But you can only get that through actually walking with it, walking on it. So you'll spend some time with this, which is good. We expect you to do this. And you'll ask other people, they'll tell you this seems right. Or some people will be like, what church are you talking about? Well, that ain't the church we go to. And you'll start to finesse it and be more like it. And you'll add more stories to it from other people. That's why you'll have these handouts. You'll have this recording to refer back to. Guide others through this process with you. Build upon it. We are a storytelling people. And so that's what this relationship part of it will be. Now, just to give you a hint on the process, Matt, and you'll tell me if I'm running too long, but the process, what will happen is to the main email that I have for all of you, there were 89 of you at some point in today's workshop. I don't have all your emails. So to whoever was the person who signed the participation agreement, I have those emails. So you will get a link to, and I'm going to put it on the chat box right now, but so that you can actually have it. I have created a special page for you on the TryTank website. This special page has both Simon Sinek's 18-minute video on the golden circle so that you can watch that and get a better understanding of it. It'll have all these slides. It'll have the recordings from today's workshop. And then in a few days' time, and I'm on purpose not putting in their step 2 and 3 yet. We want you to walk in these shoes before I ask you to run the marathon, right? So take your time with it, live into it, be with it. So this link will also be sent to the main sign-up, so you don't have to it's there, but you'll also get it. You'll get it in an email, and just be with it, live into it before you start. The next steps are asynchronous. We don't have to gather together as one group. This was hard. I know it's in the middle of the week. I know some of you work, so I get that. So the next parts are on your own. I'll be with you every step of the way. But so Lee, thank you, and Matt, thank you so much for your help on that.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. And I think you brought up something that's a fantastic call out, is when we go back to our congregations, there might be some people in there who go, just like Lorenzo said, I don't know if that's our why. And the idea is that's okay. As an individual, the why is the articulation of you at your natural best. I would argue that none of us are our best selves 100% of the time, right? Same thing with our churches. We don't do just one thing. We do many things. And not every single person is touched by every single story, every single experience in the same way. The idea is you can feel more confident because you rooted it in stories. And that's really why it's so important that we ground these in the reality of the experience that we've had. And that's why stories are so important, is because they serve as proof that this is what we can be when we are at our best. And so when you may hear some of those things of like, well, I don't know about that, the idea is you can pull from the well of examples that you hopefully gather in this conversation, or if you go back and continue the conversation and mine some more stories from the group, like a larger group, pulling those real world examples in actually gives you some real legs to stand on and say, really, this kind of is, let me tell you how. And then you can kind of share different examples. So thank you for bringing that up, Lorenzo. I appreciate the space, and thank you for creating the space for everybody to join in today. I see we had one question. What was it? Is it from Dixie? What did Dixie ask, Lee?
Just if we're going to work on our hows and our whats today. We think that you probably know your whats, and those are going to vary, and those vary all the time. It's those tangible things that you do as a church, as a person. Those are all part of your whats, and the whats can look very different, and the whats change. The hows and the whys, those don't change. The hows might evolve, but that's a long, slow process over a lot of time. The why stays there, so it's foundational. So we aren't going to work on those hows today as a group, but you've got the tools to do that. Matt was showing you the blueprint on how to make that happen with the hows as well. And it's any of those themes that didn't make it into your why statement, those are probably some pretty good candidates for those hows.
Yep. And you can turn those into, the way we like to format them, if you're looking to do that, we format them as action statements. So take the theme. So if optimism is the theme, maybe the action statement is look for the silver lining. Make it action oriented so that people know what it looks like. Because there are a ton of great organizations out there that have great sounding values that no one knows exactly what they mean, or we've all got 10 different views of what they mean when we put them into practice. Trust, great value. How do you build trust? We all get there different ways. So if you make it an action statement, what you do is set the standard for how we show up for each other, and you can actually see it play out in front of you. So yeah. Anything else to add, Lee, before we wrap up for the day?
Sorry, one more great question from Linda in the chat there. How's the why statement different from a vision statement?
Great question. Love to hear Lee's perspective on this as well. To me, the why statement is, well, it's from where they come from. So why statement comes from our past. It's our experiences that make us who we are. Same thing with the organization. We source it from our past, who we have been at our best. And to me, a vision is that projected into the future of where we want to go. So we almost think of your why as the vehicle that helps you get towards that vision. because it helps build that world that you're looking towards. Lee, anything to add on that?
Yeah, that usually starts off with something like the vision would be, imagine a world where this could be the case, sort of thing. So where all people were fed and go to bed safe and secure each and every night. So like that would be a vision compared to the why, which is rooted in that origin.
Yeah, love it. All right. Well, I want to respect, Lorenzo mentioned this is the middle of the week and I know people have stuff to do. Lee mentioned also, we're going to teach you how to save the chat. So if you want to save the chat that you had today, and that'll include everything from the main session that went in there. And then I think also your breakout session chats should be in there as well. Open up the chat box at the bottom right, right above where you would type your message, you can see 3 dots on the right side. Click on those 3 dots if you are on a desktop. And then you should see save chat as the first option. And you can save that just as a text file and you can open that later. I'm not 100% certain on saving on mobile. Lee, do you remember how to save on mobile?
It does not work on mobile because there's no drive to go to on iPhones and iPads and things like that. But the good news is that you can get your friends, your other co-participants version of that. And that should have all the notes you've typed all the way through. And any of including in the breakout rooms or anything along those lines, plus the notes that we've been posting in there about how to kind of do each one of those steps. So that can be a nice guide for you when you're taking it back to your own congregations.
All right. Love it. Lorenzo, you want to take us home with a benediction or anything like that?
How churchy of us. I just hope and I pray that all of us will have a wonderful afternoon. That we will take this, that we will grow into it to show the world God's love, a world that so desperately needs it. So thank you all for being with us today. God bless you all, and we will see you soon. Thank you.